You've done this drive. Maybe not this exact one, but you've done it. I-80 through Iowa, or I-40 outside Amarillo, or 90 across South Dakota. It's flat. It's been flat for 2 hours. Your podcast ran out 40 minutes ago, and then off to the right, you see the first one. Then another. Then about 60 more. And you do the thing everybody does. You start counting. You get to 12. You lose your place. You start over. You give up. And somewhere in there, a question shows up in your head that I'd bet money you've never actually answered. Who owns that? Not wind energy as a concept. That specific white tower. Somebody wrote a check for it. Somebody is being paid right now while you're doing 78 with a gas station coffee sweating in the cup holder. So here's what I want to do for the next few minutes. I want to take one turbine, price it out like an asset, and show you what actually lands in the owner's bank account. Because I've spent about 12 years staring at cash flows for a living, and I'll tell you the thing that broke my brain the first time I modeled one of these. A wind farm is not an energy company. It's a bond. A bond that somebody welded blades onto. The electricity is almost a side effect. I'll prove it. Start with one turbine. A modern American land-based turbine runs about 3.5 megawatts of nameplate capacity. Blade tip up around 500 feet. Rotor wider than a 747's wingspan. Nameplate is a lie, though. Nameplate means what it makes if the wind is perfect forever. Real wind farms in good country run a capacity factor around 40%. So take 3.5 megawatts times 8,760 hours in a year times 0.4, and you get roughly 12,000 megawatt hours. 12,000 megawatt hours is enough to run about 1,000 American homes from one machine. That part still gets me. Now price it. Older contracts signed a few years back were locking in somewhere in the 20s and 30s per megawatt hour. Today, wind power purchase agreements in North America are averaging around $84. So depending on when you signed, that one turbine grosses somewhere between $400,000 and $1 million a year. And what did it cost? Land-based wind runs roughly $1,200 to $1,800 per kilowatt installed. Call it $1,500. That's $5.25 million. For one, $5 million, 1,000 homes, 40% of the time, which brings me to Dale. Dale is my mother's cousin, farms corn and beans outside of Alta, Iowa, and in 2011, a guy in a rented Tahoe knocked on his door with a lease. Dale called my dad. My dad called me, because I was the one who'd gone off to do finance instead of something useful. The offer was 3 turbines on his ground. Payment, a little per acre during the option period, then real money once they were spinning. Today, the typical range is $4,000 to $8,000 per turbine per year, or a royalty of roughly 3 to 5% of gross revenue off the turbines on your parcel, and those royalties usually escalate over the 20 or 30-year term. Dale did the math on the back of a seed catalog. 3 turbines. Call it 25, 30 grand a year, escalating, for doing nothing. Then he asked me the question that actually matters. What's the catch? The catch is that you lose control of your own dirt. Access roads where you didn't want roads, trucks, crane pads, restrictions on what you can build. And the lease outlives you. A lot of these run 30 years with extensions, which means your kids inherit the contract, not the negotiation. Dale signed. His neighbor, a mile east, didn't get an offer at all because the wind resource on his section modeled worse. Same view out the window. One gets a check, one doesn't. Researchers actually have a name for this, the royalty paradox. Support for wind in these counties runs above 70%, but the money lands on a small slice of landowners. One study in West Texas found the average landowner receiving royalties was pulling roughly $48,000 a year. That's not a policy problem. That's a Thanksgiving problem. Okay, back to the asset. Let's build the whole thing. 200 megawatts, 57 turbines. At $1,500 a kilowatt, that's $300 million. $300 million. And you have no customers. Ugh. So before you pour a single foundation, you go find a utility or a data center company or a corporate buyer and you sign a power purchase agreement. 20 years, fixed price per megawatt hour. They take the power, you take the certainty. And this is the whole ballgame. Because that contract is what the bank actually lends against. The bank isn't underwriting wind. The bank is underwriting a 20-year receivable from an investment-grade counterparty. They'll size your debt off a brutally conservative production estimate, the amount of energy you'd hit in 99 out of 100 years, and lend against that. Which means the wind is the least interesting part of a wind farm. I know how that sounds, but sit with it. The physical asset is a machine that converts a free input into a commodity. The financial asset is a 2-decade fixed-price contract. Those are completely different things, and only one of them is bankable. Now the part almost nobody outside the industry knows about. And the reason I got a very expensive dinner in Manhattan in 2016. Her name is Priya. She structured tax equity for a large bank, and I asked her genuinely, naively, who the first customer of a wind farm is. She said, the Treasury. Here's what she meant. For decades, American wind ran on the production tax credit. You generate a megawatt hour, you earn a credit against federal taxes recently around $27.50 per megawatt hour, inflation adjusted, for the first 10 years of operation. Go back to our 200 megawatt farm. It makes about 700,000 megawatt hours a year. At $27.50, that's roughly $19 million a year in tax credits. Now, compare that to a power contract at, say, $40 a megawatt hour. That's $28 million of electricity revenue. The tax credit is worth 2/3 of the power. Except there's a problem, and it's a beautiful one. A newly built wind farm doesn't have $19 million of tax liability to offset. It has depreciation and interest expense and losses. The credits are worthless to the person who earned them. So, an entire industry got built to solve that. Banks and insurance companies, people with enormous tax bills, put cash into the project and take the credits instead. The developer gets money up front, the bank gets a reduced tax bill, and after about 10 years, the ownership economics flip back to the sponsor. Priya described her job to me as buying other people's paperwork. She wasn't wrong. She was allocating capital based on Section 45 of the tax code, and the turbines were a rounding error in her model. That's the second time the phrase came back to me. Not an energy business, a structured product. But here's where I have to stop being cheerful, because there's a flaw baked into wind that no amount of financial engineering fixes. You produce the most product at the exact moment your product is worth the least. My friend Marcus trades power in ERCOT, that's the Texas grid, and he explained it to me on a phone call I still think about. Wind blows hardest overnight in the spring. Overnight in the spring, nobody in Texas needs electricity. Everyone's asleep, nobody's running AC, and every turbine in the panhandle is going full tilt at once. So the price collapses, sometimes below zero. Negative prices. Meaning you pay the grid to take your electricity. And here's the twist that made me put my coffee down. If you're still inside your 10-year PTC window, you'll happily pay up to about $27 a megawatt hour to keep generating because the tax credit is worth more than the loss. So you bid negative on purpose, which is a genuinely wild sentence. The tax credit designed to encourage clean power is also the thing that makes generators actively crash the price of power. Once you age out of the credit, your break-even snaps to roughly zero, and now you just shut down. Every month, more of the American wind fleet crosses that line and starts curtailing itself. Marcus put a number on it that stuck. In ERCOT, in 2025, standalone wind captured about 63% of the average market price at its own location. 63 cents on the dollar before you pay anybody. And that's on the good days. The bad days are transmission. My old boss, I'll call him Ken, because he'd hate this story, bought into a merchant wind position in West Texas around 2018. No PPA, pure exposure to market prices. His thesis was simple. Power demand goes up, wind is the cheapest thing on the grid, print money. He got the demand call exactly right. Texas load has set record after record. He still lost badly because of something called basis risk. The price of electricity in Texas isn't one number. It's thousands of numbers, one at every node on the grid. And out in the panhandle, where all the wind is, there aren't enough wires to carry it to Dallas and Houston. So when the wind rips, the local node price craters while the hub price stays healthy. Ken was selling at the node and hedged at the hub. The spread ate him alive. ERCOT curtails somewhere on the order of a gigawatt an hour, averaged across the year. On big days, SPP has seen 5 gigawatts of wind curtailed at once. That's not a bad weather event. That's Tuesday. Lesson from Ken, and he'd want me to say it plainly. In wind, geography, and copper matter more than your spreadsheet. Let's talk about what breaks, because the pitch decks skip it. A wind turbine has a gearbox. That gearbox turns a shaft at maybe 15 revolutions per minute into something that spins fast enough to make electricity, and it lives 300 feet in the air, in Oklahoma, being twisted by weather for 25 years. They fail at roughly 0.7 to 1% a year. That sounds tiny until you own 57 of them. A replacement runs $200,000 to $500,000, and the parts have lead times of a month to 3 months. But the part that actually hurts is the crane. I learned this from a guy named Wade who ran field service for an operator in the Panhandle and who described crane mobilization to me while eating a burrito the size of my forearm. To swap a component at the top of a modern tower, you need a lattice boom crawler crane. There are not many. They have to be trucked in on multiple loads, assembled on site, and they charge by the week running into the hundreds of thousands. Wade's rule: the repair is cheap, getting to the repair is expensive. Operating costs for a land-based farm run north of $40 per kilowatt per year. Call it $8 to $10 million annually on our 200 megawatt project, and that number climbs as the fleet ages. Small farms have it worse, because that crane costs the same whether you own 10 turbines or 100. So let's total it up. 200 megawatts, $300 million. Roughly $28 million of contracted power revenue minus $9 million of operations. Minus land payments, insurance, property taxes, asset management. You land somewhere around $17 to $18 million of operating cash flow on a $300 million asset. Call it 6% unlevered. 6% on a machine that could be destroyed by a hailstorm. That is not a venture return. That is a bond, which is exactly what I said 20 minutes ago. And it's why the tax credits mattered so much. They weren't a bonus on top of a good business. They were what turned a mediocre business into a financeable one. Now hold that thought, because in the last 13 months, the American wind industry got hit by 2 trucks at once. Truck number 1. On the 4th of July, 2025, a tax bill was signed that accelerated the phase-out of the clean electricity credits for wind and solar. The new rule: if your project doesn't begin construction by the 4th of July, 2026, it has to be in service by the end of 2027 to get the credit at all. Miss both, and the credits are simply gone. That created the strangest year I've watched in this sector. A 12-month sprint to begin construction, which in tax law doesn't mean what you think it means. It can mean physical work of a significant nature, or, after a court fight this past June restored it, spending 5% of your project cost, which is why my friend Elena, who develops in the Midwest, spent this spring buying transformers and blades she didn't need yet and parking them in a field in Nebraska to start the clock. She called me the last week of June sounding like she hadn't slept since Easter and said, "I'm not building a wind farm, I'm building a receipt." Truck number 2 is worse. Every land-based wind project in America needs a Defense Department review. Turbines are tall. They show up on radar. For 15 years, that was routine paperwork. Since August of 2025, the department has not approved a project. Draft agreements stopped going out. Meetings got canceled. By this spring, industry groups counted more than 250 stalled projects representing something like 30 gigawatts of capacity. Roughly 50 of them in Texas alone, in a state that runs on wind. So the tax credit is expiring and the permit office isn't answering the phone. Which produces a result that I find genuinely fascinating, and I want to be careful here because it's the part most people get backwards. If you already own a wind farm, this is the best news you've ever gotten. Think about it as a supply shock. New American wind supply has essentially stopped. Meanwhile, electricity demand is going vertical because of data centers, and buyers are chasing every clean electron they can find. Look what happened to prices. Wind PPA offers in North America hit about $84 per megawatt hour in the second quarter of this year, up 17.5% year over year. That's not a cost story. That's a scarcity story. An operating wind farm with an interconnection agreement, a signed permit, and turbines already in the ground is now something you cannot reproduce at any price. Not because of money, because of paperwork. My friend Rachel runs acquisitions at an infrastructure fund, and she stopped looking at development projects entirely about a year ago. Her whole thesis now is buying old, boring, fully depreciated wind farms coming off their original contracts. Because here's what happens in year 21. The PPA expires. The turbines are paid for. The debt is gone. And suddenly you own a machine with basically no capital cost that sells into the open market. Over in Spain, buyers just paid around $1.36 million per megawatt for a portfolio of merchant wind, averaging 21 years old, near the top of the range for those assets. 21 years old. Nobody's contract. And it priced like a prize. Rachel's line. Everyone underwrites years 1 through 20. The money is in 21 through 40. Then there's repowering. Same site, same roads, same grid connection, new nacelles and longer blades, fewer turbines, way more output. Case studies show generation increases that are frankly hard to believe, and permitting that takes a year instead of 5 because the site is already approved. That's the real asset, not the steal. The permission. So should you own one? Realistically, you're not writing a $300 million check this week. But you can own the exposure. Listed renewable operators and yieldcos are essentially portfolios of these contracts. Infrastructure funds hold them. And if you own rural land in the right wind corridor, you're already holding a call option and you might not know it. Just underwrite it for what it is. Not a green story, not a tech story. A 20-year contract wrapped around a depreciating machine, sitting at a specific point on a congested grid in a country where the rules just change twice in a year. The wind is free. That's the trap. When your fuel costs nothing, so does everybody else's. And the price of what you make goes to zero at precisely the hour you make the most of it. Understand that, and you understand the whole industry. Next time you're on that highway and you catch yourself counting, remember, you're not looking at power plants. You're looking at contracts. 60 of them, turning slowly, in a field somewhere in Iowa. If this changed how you see them, hit subscribe. We take apart a different business every single week, and I've got a list of weird ones coming. Drop in the comments which asset you want next, and I'll read every one of them. All the sources for the numbers in this video are linked in the description. See you next week.